and welcome back to another episode of Elevated Perspective Podcast. I am Courtney, and today I have the honor and the privilege and also the pleasure of sitting down with Tiara, the founder, owner, operator, all the amazing things behind Blaxicocina, which is the first and only soul food restaurant here in Mexico City, ran by a Black woman from the US. Blaxicocina is a pillar in the community, a great watering hole, meeting spot for like-minded people. And also they do a lot of really cool events, pop-ups. I had some oxtail pizza that changed my life not too long ago. So without further ado,
Tiara. Woo.
hi,
Yes. Hey,
how are you?
I'm well. Thank you for asking. Thank you for being here for this conversation.
No, thank you for
Yes.
being here.
Yes.
I know every time we pop down to Mexico City, from the very first time Justin and I came, you were doing a Thanksgiving thing, like a Thanksgiving pop-up, right? That was before the restaurant was
Yeah. So y'all were like OGs who came out from the very beginning. Yeah, that was one of the prototype events that eventually led to Blaxicocina, the restaurant where we are right now in our birthday. So that's a very special time, and it's a very special time right now, getting closer to Thanksgiving and Christmas and the end of the year when it's evident that change is upon us.
Yes, change is definitely fun. And I want to talk about all of the things that you have coming up, some big changes, So take me back to the beginning.
Yeah.
So you're in the US, you're from the DC area, right? And one day you wake up and you say, I think I'll move to Mexico City and start a soul food restaurant and build all of this community.
No, that's not how it happened. I'm originally from the Maryland, DC area. I've lived abroad in Morocco for 2 years, Portland, Oregon for 8 years. I got caught in Buffalo, New York during the pandemic. And so I was there for a year. And after the first year of the pandemic, and especially the first winter in Buffalo, I was like, I will absolutely not be here next year. And so I decided to come to Mexico, mainly because I had been to like nearly 50 other countries in my travels at that point in my life, but I had never been to Mexico because I always thought like, oh, it's right there. I'll get there eventually. I would rather go to Kenya or Thailand or, wherever it is first because those are harder to get to. And so during the pandemic, the geographical proximity of Mexico to the U.S. and like if something happens to me or something happens to my family, it's really easy for me to get back home. If there's some kind of emergency, or vice versa. So so that's how I came down here, and I came thinking I would be here for 6 months. Um, Working clandestinely. My employer at the time didn't know that I was down here. So I was down here for about 9 months. I just loved it. I kept extending. And then in the end, everybody on my entire team ended up getting laid off anyway. Ooh. So this was just like one of many rounds of tech cuts from the particular company that I worked for, but that was a part of like a larger slimming down of employees across various tech sectors. Yeah. And so it was, I don't know, 3 weeks after I signed the lease on the apartment that I live in now that I got laid off. And so I was just like, well, I already have the apartment. I already know that I like it here. So I'm just going to stay and see what I got to do to figure it out. So once I had that baseline of I want to stay in Mexico City, then it became, okay, how do I do that? And because I had been down here for those 9 months before I got laid off, and I was living well within my means, not outside of them, I had saved up like 6 months of savings, so I didn't have to run and get a job right away. And so that is sort of like the seed money of what helped me start Blaxicocina back in whatever that was. It reopened in February 2021.
Oh, that's dope. So, and that's interesting because I feel like so many times we talk to people that have immigrated and moved, and it's like, why'd you choose here? But it's funny because sometimes they're like, I was stuck here during the pandemic, and you're like, well, I was stuck somewhere very cold in the US.
Right.
And this is where I kind of escaped to after that.
Yep. And it worked out because I already spoke some Spanish before I got here, so it felt like an opportunity to improve my Spanish because I hadn't really used it in a long time. And Mexicans that I've met in the U.S. are pretty dope, so I figured they must be better, at the source. So, so it was really just kind of circumstances and serendipity and fate that all of this came to be.
That's amazing. Yeah. That's dope. So you're down here, you've gotten laid off, you're like, we're going to make it work, we're going to figure something out. How did the notion or idea of like a restaurant come into being? Like, were you cooking when you were back in the States? Is it something you've always liked to do, or?
Yeah, I grew up cooking with the women in my family, so I have very vivid memories of get-togethers, like on Saturdays or whatever, card parties, that kind of stuff, and just like everybody preparing the food together in the kitchen. And I've always been somebody who's just been very interested in like ingredients and watching cooking shows and that kind of stuff. And I feel like there was a time like when I would come home after school with my little brother, it started like just making him like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Okay, now we're gonna toast this peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Oh snap! Now what happens if we like, add this to it or do that? And so I think I just kind of got used to playing around in the kitchen through being the older sister, and then I started making dinner, when my parents would get home, and then eventually I was making it before they got home, and so my mom was pretty much just like, "Oh, great, like you got it." So yeah, exactly. You're good at this. Yeah, they still gonna be new dishes though. Like what the hell? Yeah. So those things are the memories and the foundation of what inspired me to pivot because I always wanted to do something culinary, wanted to be a chef, but I grew up in the DC area and it's a company town, and so you just get used to people who work for the military or for the government or whatever. And so I did the whole like international relations sort of route in the beginning part of my life and my studies and university and all that stuff, and eventually the trajectory when I just kind of moved slowly away from that, and then the getting laid off part from this job that I actually loved and was so excited about. Um, Having that happen just really shook me up in a way that made me have to think about, okay, well, if you want to stay here, you can't keep doing things the conventional, traditional way that you have been. We tried that. It's not that it's not. So it's for some people, but it didn't work for me. Yeah. So I needed to figure out like something different, and this felt like an opportunity to just take a chance on myself and do something that I'm really passionate about. Even though I had no idea what I was doing when I started. So.
Well, I heard someone say, and I'm gonna misquote it, but it's something to the effect of like travel and new experiences like expand you, but then your job is to figure out like what you want to fill up that space with.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, you're right. What do I? Because just like you said, I think the more you experience and you travel, you grow, you expand, you learn. Sometimes, and not all the time, but sometimes it just gets more difficult to relate to the people from back home or to fit into boxes that you used to fit into with plenty of wiggle room.
I think the only thing that I can say is just like it's just as important in life to figure out what you don't want as it is to figure out what you do want. So you need to narrow those things down, and the only way to do that is to go live and have those experiences, and not. I've tried very hard not to be somebody who has a like the what if thread in my background, the decisions that I've made and this and that. So I've done some crazy things like, going from studying modern 20th century, world history at the University of Maryland, thinking I'm going to be a diplomat in the, for the State Department, to doing the Peace Corps and then suddenly realizing that I'm interested in geography and wine, to then taking some random advice from some Oregonians that I met and moving to Oregon sight unseen, knowing nobody.
What?
To work in the wine industry. Like it felt like, like Eddie Murphy.
How many lives have you lived?
I've lived a lot. You know, also talking to Oregon's Bud Tender of the Year, 2017. So like I worked in a dispensary. I sold weed. I was on the front end of that. Like I wrote about weed. I had the freelance job of writing about food and Portland and culture and arts and stuff like that in Portland.
That's amazing.
I worked in city government and did social media for urban planning department.
I have so many questions about herbal planning or urban planning, which doesn't sound like it's like the most exciting part of all that. And it's not, but like my brain loves this stuff.
Yeah.
But we'll save that for part two or a different part. I will not tell us about, so we're sitting in this restaurant. I'm looking at like the decor. I've had the food. I've been to the event. So how did Blaxicocina, is this like, brick and mortar that we're sitting in right now, begin?
It really was a pivot from that feeling of, oh my God, what do? I just got laid off. And so I started doing pop-ups off the roof of my house. In my tiny kitchen, it's not as big as this table. And the first iteration of that was Soul Food Sunday. I think we had like 70 people there that just like came. Yeah, they were in my house and my rooftop. Like it was actually really, really beautiful. And that was when I knew that I had something because I had been at that point in Mexico City for probably about a year. And so I didn't realize then, but I know now that I was sort of like on the front wave of Black folks coming from the U.S. and other parts of the world to Mexico City. And so I noticed, yeah, there's no soul food here, but there's this growing Black American community. And I know, like, even when I lived in Morocco, there were no soul food restaurants there, but I had to, like, make the stuff that I wanted to taste when I wanted to taste from home. Yeah. And a lot of it I had to do from scratch. So, like, if I couldn't find the right texture of cornmeal, I had to grind my own corn in a blender to make cornbread, which is exactly what we're doing here for the cornbread, the hush puppies, the fish fry, like all of these things that require corn, like we have to actually grind it ourselves to get what we need to be able to do it at the consistency that it's expected of, a soul food restaurant. Yeah. So all of that stuff that I had to do in Morocco, that adapting, living in another culture, like all that stuff prepared me for this. And honestly, Morocco, the culture is so different, and I loved it. But if I can do that there, I can do that here with my eyes closed. Like Mexico and the culture between the U.S., we're different, but we're very similar. We're all North Americans, so yeah, it's like way easier. I love that. I think even the concept, as you're like talking about it, what just pops into my head is like how we see foods traditionally from West Africa that are like spread all through like the diaspora. They're a little different just because of the place that you're in. Yeah. And so even the concept of being like ethnically African American and like wanting to be able to recreate that in a different place. Yeah. And using that same sort of just like ancestral spirit of like, well, if I can't find it, I'm gonna make it. Yep. And it may be a little this way, a little that way, not exactly the same, but like the spirit of us is still like in the food. And that's amazing. What this is all about, because I do feel like one thing that I felt very sensitive about and I felt was like a little bit misunderstood, but this is also a part of like the learning lesson of telling the story of Blaxicocina and communicating, what the narrative is clearly, which is hard because I have two audiences, one that speaks Spanish and one that speaks English. So it can be sometimes be difficult to balance those things. But especially from the Black community here, I feel like, and sometimes, not just people who live here, but who are coming to visit, they want the soul food to be exactly like they had it at home. And I'm like, I am not your grandma. I am not your auntie. Like I don't have always the same ingredients available to me. And also, to be quite honest, even if I did, I love the idea of honoring the place that I now live, that I call home, Mexico, that has this crazy long culinary tradition. And you can see it in the street food that's everywhere. You can see it in like, the fancier restaurants where they're doing versions of that street food, it like elevated, whatever. But I just think it's so cool how fresh everything is here and how seasonal it is. And I want to be able to say that I am a conscientious visitor here and for however long I stay, and that I'm actually honoring the culture through the food and really honestly trying to bring to the forefront that little known history of not everybody who was enslaved went north. They went south. They came to Mexico. They found freedom here as well. The same way this new wave of remote workers and just like people who are younger, fresher, wanting something different for their lives and what the U.S. has made us to believe is available to us, like that is something that's really beautiful and that's not really talked about enough. And so if I can showcase that on the plate through food, hell yeah, that's so beautiful. Yeah, I love that. I love Diva Green. I got your block. Love Diva. Yeah. Hi Diva. We haven't met yet, but I love you. Soon, I love you. She's also a Libra like myself. Anywho, and I forgot Diva. But I think that was part of like what was talking to her. When I talked to her, that was part of what was so like inspiring and beautiful about it is this notion of like Mexico and Black people, whether that's people that are indigenous to Mexico, they happen to come here through the whole slavery, like Michigas or whatever, like whatever it is, even now, like our roots run deeper here than like we were ever taught to believe. Right. And it's really amazing to see like uncovering that history and also like with what you're doing, having new fusions and new respect and finding different ways for our cultures to really like integrate and like play with each other in a way that is so beautiful.
I'm curious if they're like, what are your favorite sort of like events or pop-ups or like fusion? Like, what are the favorite ways that you've been able to sort of like bridge that culinary gap and bring the cultures together on a plate?
Um, I don't think I feel like we've done so many events that were around like music or comedy or um done like drag brunch, like that kind of stuff. I don't always feel like I've maybe done a good job of making the food the main event. So when we do things that are like particularly special, usually it's kind of like, oh, you wander into a restaurant, look at the menu, oh, look, there's something new, but there's not like a lot of big fanfare around it. And I think that's largely because I'm just constantly overstretched and like oversaturated when it comes to like my responsibilities. Being pretty much for all intents and purposes a solo entrepreneur in this endeavor. But things like the oxtail chilaquiles, like people love that, and it is
So good.
I know, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. Like, I did in the very, very beginning, I had a lot more like soul food Mexican fusion things on the menu, but the problem was, and still kind of remains, but it's getting better, is that a lot of Mexicans, they don't know the term soul food. Like they haven't heard that. Even if you say comida del alma, like that doesn't really register anything or yeah, and so and then even down in this part of Mexico, a lot of people aren't thinking about the US and maybe the ways that we think they're thinking about us, and so they might not even fully understand that there are black people who are Americans and we are not the same as
I always wonder
somebody from the
that.
Caribbean or somebody from Africa. Like people, I have to correct folks who I know they mean well, but even now, when they're explaining, it's usually Mexicanos who do this when they explain, like, oh yeah, Tiara's doing she's doing Afro food at Blaxicocina. I'm like, no, no, no. Like Africans have their own food that is vast and different depending on where you are. And then there's people from the Caribbean, and then you also have like black people who came to the U.S. and developed their own. So and a lot of education, and so for that reason, things like when I before I got the idea to grind my own corn for the grits, I was thinking like, okay, I want to do shrimp and grits, but I don't have the like right grits. I can't find grits to do that. So what if I use the corn tortilla and replace that and use that as the corn, and then it's sort of like chilaquiles, which everybody's always used to here. So we had like these shrimp and chip chilaquiles, and they were actually really delicious. Like I would eat that all the time.
You got any more of those?
I can hook you up. I can hook you up. Special request. But yeah, but so people would like, Mexicanos would walk by and look at the menu and they're like, oh, like what is this? Like you got shrimp on chilaquiles. Like it was just so foreign. And then but for black folks who understood like the playfulness of that type of dish and sort of what it was inspired by, it made sense. And so I had to like pull myself way back and start with sort of just the basics. Be like, okay, let me introduce y'all to like these are the staples that no matter where you go in the world and you find a soul food restaurant, they have to have this, and this. They're gonna have fried chicken. They're gonna have hopefully collard greens or kale or something similar. Mac and cheese absolutely has to be on that menu. Some kind of sweet potato better be somewhere
Kind of sweet
around there. And so like those standards are the things that I had to really focus on. And then on top of that, there was the whole struggle that I underestimated, which was teaching people who have no cultural context for this food how to make it. And so I think the expectation is that I, Tiara, am in the kitchen cooking all this food, so that way it has to be on point like this and this all the time. But how can I be back there cooking when I also have to be out here greeting you and talking to you about the story, and I'm also maybe bartending, and I'm also maybe trying to figure out why the delivery of sweet potatoes hasn't gotten here and we can't make XYZ. So it's really just like a lot of
I didn't even think about that.
yeah, it's a lot.
Especially with the cooking,
Yeah.
because even like, Justin's from Canada.
Mm-hmm.
So if I want a pot of grits, like I have to make that pot of grits myself.
Mm-hmm.
Very different things.
Right.
But the notion eyeball it out or, stir and get the consistency right and all those like little things, it does have to be difficult.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I didn't even think about that. That's interesting. So, as far as even the general business practices, while we're here, of like setting that up and hiring people and finding of look like, because I feel like starting a business, especially like a brick and mortar business with employees in a different country, like that's mind blowing for a lot of people. So, like, what are kind of the steps for that?
I mean, I think I did a lot of things out of order. So, part of my plan moving forward is to just kind of take a break and take stock of all of the learnings and how I would do things differently for, version 2.0 when that time comes. Um, but I think if you're going to start any business, probably the first thing to do would be finding a really good lawyer and a really good
Mm,
accountant so they can help you get your books and your permits and all that stuff set up. Because once you have that, then all of these other things become a lot easier, but it's much harder to go back and you already got the business started, but you don't have all these things in order.
mhm.
It can make things a lot more complicated later on.
That makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
And now, since you have mentioned version 2.0,
hmm
so tell us what's coming, what's in the future. So Blaxicocina, as it stands now, will only be around until when?
well, I think by the time this comes out, there will probably be some more concrete information about, what we're doing. I think right now I'm just sort of just taking time to breathe and feel what I need to feel to make the right decision that's best for me, for the brand and everything moving forward, for the team that's given so much to build this with me. But yeah, I've if people have been following the Black Scene story, you will know from little breadcrumbs that I've dropped, over the last year or so that things have not been great behind the scenes here. There's the Instagram of it all, and obviously it is a successful business. But the problem is that in the kitchen, we've had a lot of flooding from water coming up through the foundation. We have water dripping down. The landlord is not doing what he should to fix those things. And so that was sort of like my main motivation for thinking that it's time to move Blaxicocina somewhere else. But then in the process of thinking about moving and all the energy that it requires to move, like think about just moving apartments. Now
Mm,
imagine like moving an entire restaurant. Like
yeah.
you have so many things that are in here and you know commercial contracts are so much harder I think to deal with than like apartment contract. There's just like a lot of stuff that has to happen, and so I really just got to the point where I felt like, you know what, I think what needs to happen is I need to just let this thing go and start over. I think the easy thing to do would be to just like keep going, keep going, keep going, figure it out, figure it out. But I also feel in my body that I've been fighting for so long to do the
Mm,
things that I feel like I have to do, or I didn't have a decision, or I had to like do this, like, care for my team and make sure that everybody's taken care of. But I'm not even taking care of myself in that. And after 2 years of this, I just feel depleted, honestly, like mentally, spiritually, emotionally. And I can't ignore that. Like I was saying, if it was my physical health, it would be no question. You need to stop and take care of yourself. So why should those other aspects of my health and well-being be put to the back seat because they're not the physical
yeah.
manifestation? And honestly, too, I mean, shit, I have high blood pressure now.
I was
So
gonna
like I
say, and
said,
the
it
body
does.
keeps the score
Yeah,
anyway. So all that
exactly.
stress and central
Yeah,
nervous system. So I was talking with
yeah.
Justin about like cortisol and all
Yeah,
the effects of that. I will say I'm excited for you.
yeah.
Nice little breaky break, a little sabbatical, time to regroup. Maybe I'm kind of hoping this is just me selfishly before we leave Mexico City. I'm hoping for like maybe a little pop up or two, maybe a little event, it's maybe a little something.
Things will keep going. Things will keep going in a smaller way. And I think probably the main thing that I didn't mention too is I had this conversation with myself a year ago before I
Mm,
re-signed the lease to like continue here. But at that time, I felt like we weren't in a very good position yet, like in terms of people knowing about the restaurant and the brand and this and stuff and that kind of stuff to really move. And so I was like, whatever, I'm just gonna give it one more year and I'm gonna spend all of 2024 like looking for options to move the restaurant somewhere else. And I think I kind of lost sight of that. I got comfortable and was just like, no, we'll make it work here. We'll figure it out. Like, look how things are growing. The community And the people who know about this place, like I said, it's grown. It is a successful business,
The
and
community loves
it is a
you.
really
We
hard
love it
thing. It is
here.
a really hard thing
It's a first stop.
to
It's a
s-
necessary first stop.
yes,
For Black
yes.
people that are touching down in Mexico City, you have to come to Blaxicocina.
You have to
Whether it's
come.
shrimp chilaquiles or oxtail pizza or like whatever's on the menu, like it's just one of those things where like you walk in and it's like this is a little part of who I am and where
Yes.
I'm from that's been teleported here. We've met great friends here as well.
Listen, the place has a legacy. We've a lot been a meeting point for a lot of different people, friendships, couples. I know y'all interviewed Mark and Amanda.
Yes,
They ain't
love
gonna
them.
tell you this
Hi
part, but
y'all.
the inspiration for that came from a phone call that I had with Mark. House party, like all of those things, like those are a part of the legacy as well of Black Cena, even though I'm not involved in those things anymore. So it's been really wonderful to see this place as like a fertile ground for so many relationships and events and things that have grown and gone and done their own thing. But yeah, it's really difficult because of that to pull the plug, so to speak, on like a successful business. But I also know that this has so much energy
Mhm.
behind it and so much love and care from the community that we can definitely move forward and do version 2.0 and be okay.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about how you got here. We've touched on Oregon, DC, Morocco, this incredible journey building this business abroad. Is there anything that you have to say to other entrepreneurs out here or other people that are maybe considering a move abroad, whether that's to Mexico or to somewhere else?
Um, I'm trying to think like what I would tell people. Um, I think you just have to go for it, honestly. Like you can
Mm.
always go back home. You can always go back home. A
You
lot of people
can.
think that they can't or that, change or some kind of big decision like moving is the be all end all, but it actually isn't.
Mm.
So, yeah, I think that the not knowing and the what ifing that's the part that you can't change if you didn't take the opportunities that were available to you and you had them. Yeah.
That's true. I
Hmm.
love this. From the very beginning of this conversation, we even opened up with this notion of, know what you don't want to figure out what you do want, like expanding yourself and your horizons. And I think there's this theme, even in talking about having to step away from Blaxicocina for a minute, like this notion of like knowledge of self and like operating out of like discernment with what
Yeah.
you do
Yeah.
without being confined by limitations.
Yeah.
And I really love that. I think it's beautiful, especially for an expat story like this, where you just turned into like this pillar of community,
Mhm.
like in
Mhm.
so many ways. It's
Mhm.
impacted so many people. I think
Mhm.
that's dope.
Yeah, I feel
And I
great
really
about it.
appreciate you sitting here and talking to me and letting me be nosy and ask all of these
Oh, of
questions.
course. Yeah.
And I will hold you to that shrimp dish
Yeah.
as soon as we get off of it. Not today,
Yes.
but at
Yes.
some point in the
Yes.
near future.
Her